Welcome to this Killick Explains video and welcome to part 2 of my end of tax year basics series. Now the 5th of April is coming up pretty soon and it's better not to leave decisions about tax effective saving and investing until just a week before. It all turns into a bit of a mad rush. Finding the money you might want to shelter becomes a bit of a hassle. So let's talk about it now. Part 1 was all about ISAs and Junior ISAs, so I won't say anything more about those here. This is part 2, where I want to focus on self-invested personal pensions and the junior equivalent. All right. And whilst there is a wee bit more flexibility in terms of the sort of use it or lose it rule, it is possible to bring forward unused pension contributions, whereas it's not possible to bring forward unused ISA contributions. Nonetheless, it does make sense with a chancellor looking potentially to recoup money for the government. It does make sense to think about whether you can use these allowances sooner rather than later. So, what are the self-invested personal pension basics, if you like? Well, first of all, the annual contribution limit, that's the amount you can pay in between the 6th of April in one tax year and the 5th of April the following one, is a healthy £60,000, but that maximum is subject to a few tests. There is a thing called the relevant earnings test, which boils down, without going into detail, to do you have the net relevant amount of earnings to support a contribution of that size. Just watch out for that one. Once you've decided how much you can pop in to this shelter, it is like an umbrella, then essentially underneath the umbrella you can hold shares. Self-invested personal pensions is a clue in the name. You can choose to hold shares. Many bonds qualify, funds, all right, and cash. Although holding cash for the long term as an investment, never a great idea because inflation tends to erode its value over time. So what's the deal? Why would you bother? Why would you have those securities held underneath this investment umbrella, this tax efficient saving umbrella? And the answer is basically it will save you tax. So there is tax relief on the way in. All right. In other words, if you want to see it this way, basic rate relief means that every 80p you invest becomes £1. Higher rate and additional rate taxpayers can then claim more on their tax returns, such that if you're a higher rate taxpayer, 60p on the way in becomes £1 invested. Okay, so that's pretty useful. Once the investments are then inside the wrapper, there's no income tax, there's no capital gains tax on them. And up until the last budget, you could also say that the total fund would be outside of a death estate for inheritance tax purposes. Unfortunately, that will no longer be the case from April 2027. That's thanks to the last budget, and that is quite correctly triggering a few planning conversations right now with people wondering about how that will influence their drawdown strategy if they're close to the point where they want to dial down on stock work, for example. I won't say any more about that here, but it is just worth noting that the rules around the inheritance tax status of pensions have changed. Now, on the way out, okay, leaving aside that IHT point, on the way out, the first 25% currently, the Chancellor could change the rules in the future, but let's assume she won't. Currently, 25% is tax-free, taken in one go or staggered, and anything else is taxed on the way out at your marginal income tax rate. So that just suggests that if you're a basic rate taxpayer, you'll still have a personal allowance and that kind of thing. When you start drawing down, you'll pay income tax potentially at the basic rate. Now, those are the nuts and bolts. A few admin points. So transfers and withdrawals, slightly different things. A transfer is you deciding you're not comfortable with the performance, the charges or the support you're getting from your current provider and moving the money from one provider to another. That's fine. That can be done at more or less any time. The process takes a little while to execute, but there's no penalty attached to it, if you like. Withdrawals, on the other hand, much less straightforward with a self-invested personal pension because the minimum age, and don't be fooled by anyone trying to sell you a solution that gets around this, the minimum age is 55 currently, moving to 57 in April 2028. So this is a long-term tax shelter. Those tax breaks I talked about, income tax breaks on the way in, for example, are only given by the government for the very reason that this is quite a long-term tax-saving vehicle. Now, one or two further thoughts, okay? One or two things to remember. There used to be a thing called the lifetime allowance limit. That's gone. That restricted the amount that basically could be exempted from tax in total over the lifetime of something like a SIPP. That's gone. That's some good news. Well, less good news, I mentioned, is that private pensions, not just self-invested personal pensions, by the way, are subject to inheritance tax from April 2027. And another thing I would just point out is watch out for, if you set up one of these things with an insurance company, all right, watch out for the fact that they may auto-lifestyle you out of what they perceive to be risky investments such as equities into lower risk ones such as bonds just before you reach the minimum age at which you can access the funds. Now they're doing that in theory to de-risk your exposure, but actually it can be a bit annoying for people who don't plan to draw anything from the pot for maybe a decade or so after that first entry date. Right, now anyone thinking, well, I'm looking for something that I can do for my kids as well as myself. Maybe I've already looked at junior ISAs from the last video. Is there a junior version of a self-invested personal pension? Yes, there is. It's called a Junior SIPP, not surprisingly. Very similar idea in the sense that this shelters investments from tax, income tax, capital gains tax. This is something you can do on behalf of kids. So it can be set up from birth. Obviously, it's going to be parents and so on setting that up. Same investments available potentially, similar level of tax protection inside, but the upfront tax relief works slightly differently. So the maximum annual contribution that you could make, for example, into a junior SIPP on behalf of the child would be £2,880 per year. The government then add another £720 on top. Then it's a long game you're playing. At the moment, tax rules can be subject to change in the future. The access rules are the same as for an adult SIPP. So the very earliest point most children are going to be able to access this money is when they turn, well, what's going to be 57 from April 2028. But there you have it. Quite a useful way to provide a real leg up, potentially in the future, for kids. Okay, lots of information there. These were just refresher videos. So if you want to know more, killick.com/resources has Killick Explains videos, the how-to guides, and there are two related to the accumulation phase of pensions and the deaccumulation phase, once you hit peak savings, as it were. There are two of those, watch out for those. And then, of course, not sitting next to me, but there's our quarterly magazine, Confidant.